going to try out this new I tried Facebook Live yesterday. It didn't really work for me, but I'm going to try out YouTube Live and read and riff on the philosopher William Irwin Thompson's book, Pacific Shift. And Thompson was someone that I read. He's still alive and well, I think. I think he lives in Maine, and really in his later years, he's been focusing more on poetry than on, cultural criticism. But he was an important and remains an important influence on my own thinking. In that, when I was first being exposed to what gets called integral philosophy as an undergraduate, not in class, but I was at the University of Central Florida taking courses in majoring in cognitive science, and was reading Thompson and Gebser and Wilbur and Carl Jung and Aurobindo, philosophy that were going on in my university. And Thompson in this book, Pacific Shift, is developing a theory of the evolution of Western civilization for different, what he calls cultural ecologies. And I can just list those four so you get a sense. He's talking about a four-phase process of evolution through a riverine civilization, a Mediterranean civilization, an Atlantic civilization, and a Pacific or aerospace civilization. And it's a movement west, right? Literally from ancient Mesopotamia through Greece, Europe, and the Americas. And Thompson, an important influence for him was the Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan, and he connects to each of these four civilizations, these four cultural ecologies, a certain media technology supports that mentality. And so societies were supported by the alphabet. The Phoenicians were the trading people. They developed the alphabet, but the feudal system was based on this adherence to an alphabetic mode of technology. The capitalistic cultural ecology was supported by print, by the printing press, and the socialistic economy was supported by a more electronic mode of communication. But in any event, I want to sort of just read some key excerpts from this book and then comment on them. So, Thompson is saying that this new Pacific Shift, this new cultural ecology is emerging, and that it hasn't yet fully come into form yet. And so we're in a period of chaos, a liminal space between stories, as another integral philosopher, Thomas Berry, would put it. We're between stories, we're between cosmologies, we're in a phase that's sort of like it's the chaotic breakdown prior to the emergence of a higher order mode of organization. So Thompson writes, "A horizon provides an edge to our experience. If we move closer to it, it moves away. For it is not the content of our experience, but the structure of our knowing. And so it is with myth and history. Myth is the horizon of history. In its modality as the past, it is the world of legend. In its modality as the future, it is the world of prophecy and science fiction. So if we try to move into this horizon bodily, to rent a flat in Atlantis or freeze our bodies for later regeneration in some future perfect science in which death will have been conquered, we try to move into the horizon and eliminate the sky to make it as prosaic, literal, and three-dimensional as the ego. This form of psychic fundamentalism flattens out experience to crush the multidimensionality of the universe. Prophecies are to history what dreams are to one's waking life. They are poetic renderings of the implications of our experience. Precisely because consciousness is multidimensional, we need horizons, for there is always more going on within us. There's always more going on with us than what takes place in historical events or personal conversations. The paranoid senses what he does not know, and then renders it into a poetry that he takes literally. Nevertheless, there is often a poetic truth in the category mistakes of a paranoid vision that is missing in the reductionist schemata of scientific artists, sense that something very important has just happened to history, but they do not know how to cross over the bitter gulf that separates art from politics, imagination from economics. It is easy to look back on 1500 to see what Hieronymus Bosch was driving at. But what are these Bosches of our era trying to tell us? Are we dealing with the destructuring of the modern world system, intuited in mythological terms, or with the impending destruction of our world, whether by thermonuclear war, pollution, or some plague brought on by a genetically engineered bacterium that did not behave as the scientists of agribusiness said it would? Thompson's writing in 1985, by the way. I don't know, Thompson continues. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I think that we are experiencing a discontinuous transition from one world system to another, a catastrophe. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I feel better and think that it is going to be a transition with continuity, one like the previous transition from medievalism to modernism. On Sundays, I try to rest and seek a contemplative detachment from the vanities of scientific predictions or psychic revelations. If I am forced to choose one scenario over the other, I would rather work politically for a cultural transformation with continuity from one world system to another than join a survivalist community or wait to be picked up by a flying saucer. But one of the valid functions of a horizon is to put the foreground into perspective. If one sees history against a horizon of myth, presumably one sees more than if one's nose is camping in the tent of the daily newspapers. In the narratives of the daily news and the narratives of the Eon reveal similarities of theme and structure, where can one stand to see both the mythic backdrop to history and the immediate foreground of the daily news? Common sense would say the best place to stand is precisely at the point where both come into focus. Nothing helps perception more than an edge. We cannot see air unless it moves with wind and clouds. As Marshall McLuhan was fond of saying, I don't know who discovered water, but it certainly wasn't a fish. If we are inside an all-encompassing environment, we do not see it. The all-encompassing environment for consciousness is with life-giving rain. The rationalist mistakenly thinks that consciousness is limited to information, but the mystic and the artist know better. They know that consciousness is the erotic play of information with noise, with the recognizable but immeasurable shift for civilization is warfare. But just as consciousness cannot be limited to information, as the rationalist might wish, so culture cannot be limited to civilization as the lawyer might wish. Writing and standing armies, clay tablets and mud walls are entwined creations of the dawn of civilization. In hunting and gathering societies, and even in Neolithic agriculture, in Neolithic agricultural villages, oral culture is oral culture. Sorry, there's some infernal creation flying in the sky overhead. There's an airport nearby. It's way more active during the fire season. But now that spring has finally sprung, there was snow on the ground still just last week, but now that spring is here, the airport's super busy. So where was I? So A world of the constant weaving back and forth between noise and information. That's the oral culture. But with the crystallization of information into writing, the edge between noise and information becomes hard and rigid, like a sword, like a clay tablet, like the walls of a fortress. No wonder that the beginning and end of the Gilgamesh epic celebrate the walls of the city, the edges of civilization. But to force culture into civilization, one must do violence to human nature. And so, the new standing armies carry weapons to enforce written laws and to keep written maps of conquered territory. The turbulent shore between human culture and the island of civilization is the space of violence. Institutionalized surrounds civilization. Pretend that information does not like noise. It actually thrives on it. And although we like to pretend that governments do not like warfare, the entire organization of their various systems totally depends on it. Pacifism is an emphasis on war, precisely in the same manner in which celibacy is an emphasis on sexuality. In mind, as Gregory Bateson was fond of pointing out, the absence of a signal is a signal itself. If you don't send in your income tax, the feds will come to get you. Pacifism has not stopped war any more than celibacy has stopped fornication, precisely because, in the contradictory nature of mind, negation is emphasis. And certainly Whitehead was another who emphasized negation and absence as essential for consciousness and for knowledge, as well as Bateson here. If God says to Adam, "Look over here, Adam, do you see the tree of knowledge with its red, luscious, juicy fruit? Well, don't eat it." If God says this to Adam, God, being omniscient, is certainly aware that he has just put the thought of eating it into Adam's mind. This is what knowledge is all about, and affirmation and denial are merely the twined modalities of emphasis. A couple more pages here. This recognition changes the way we imagine the unconscious. Freud envisioned the unconscious as a coiled spring or a steam engine working through compression. But the unconscious can be seen merely as the reservoir of all negations in a culture. If you say, "Do not steal," you are creating an implicit shadow statement of steal. The collection of all these shadow statements is the unconscious, the space of forbidden knowledge. Now notice the isomorphism. Rationalism says consciousness can be reduced to information. Legalism says culture can be reduced to civilization. And priestcraft says that behavior can be reduced to moral codes. The pattern of emphasizing through negation, of course, sets up a structure in which humans are unconsciously formed to say one thing, but do another. It becomes the only human way to deal with the contradictory nature of mind. And so humans praise peace, but organize their societies around warfare. Praise marriage, but commit adultery. Praise law, but hire lawyers to cheat on their income tax or to get away with murder. If we wish to work for a transformation of culture, we had better come to terms with these matters of mind. Pacifism will not eliminate war, and fundamentalisms will never eliminate the enemies they keep on creating. Intuition and common sense tell us that war is evil, but only knowledge can inform us that the transcendence of warfare requires the transcendence of civilization. The conscious structure of the modern world is a collection of nation-states. The unconscious structure of the world is a dark ecology of warfare and terrorism. It is an enormously complex web of satellites and advanced informational systems living off the threat of war. Here again, God tried to warn us in Genesis, as is written in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. "For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." It is not so much that death comes from knowledge, but that knowledge requires the perturbation at the edge, the disturbance at the shore, the difference. If we were gods in samadhi, with minds that were spheres whose interior surface was a mirror with no images tainted on it, on its infinitely reflecting surface, we would have the mystics or the daemons consciousness without an object, but we would not have knowledge. The price of the knowledge of good and evil is death, or in another way of saying the same thing, it is time. The part of our consciousness that is multidimensional, or out of the ego's conventional construction of time and space, is the daemon. When the daemon projects out of the timeless, spaceless, undifferentiated world of the inward mirroring sphere, it falls into a world of distinctions, a world of time, a world of limits. The limit to the life of a distinct thing is its death. The definition of a living thing is sometimes something that can die. The definition of a civilization is a system organized for warfare, for a social system of death. A couple more paragraphs here, and then take a break and talk a bit about this and see what you guys are commenting here. But because human beings have minds, the reality for us is not matter, but information. And so the warfare state need not be constant destruction, but simply the idea of destruction. Actual wars could threaten the warfare system. Humans just want enough allusions to war to keep the society of warfare going. Actual thermonuclear war would threaten the whole global system of military integration and communication. The irony is not as occult as it might seem. But take the case of the ballerina. Would we praise her art, her grace, her ability to leap if gravity did not constantly pull at her with its limits? If humans had evolved as creatures in the weightless environment of space, you can be certain that classical ballet would not be the art form that they would develop. Ballet is the story of Beauty and the Beast, the lovely young thing and the horrible old beast that keeps pulling her down to earth. But Beauty triumphs because of the beast, and what we celebrate is precisely her dance at the edge between freedom and restraint. Warfare is the horrible old beast that keeps pulling civilization down. But until we recognize that humanity is the set of Beauty and the Beast, we will always set ourselves up for the oscillating rhythm of war and peace. Human beings will never disarm. For as long as they have minds in which difference and contradiction drive the system, just so long will they externalize a society in which the myth is the story of Beauty and the Beast. So if we wish to have a new culture, we must have a transformation of consciousness, a discovery that the Buddha made when he returned to sit under the tree of Adam and Eve. So, Thompson's trying to take a perspective on history, not just a perspective on history from eternity, but a perspective on history that is able to acknowledge the cultural unfolding as a drama, at the same time that he's trying to participate in initiating this next cultural ecology, this next structure of consciousness. And he's having to play at that edge, right, between what our culture, our civilization is conscious of and what it's not conscious of. And this was written, in 1985, 25 years ago, right? 35 years ago. And we're in a situation now where everything that he's discussing in this book is amplified. It's a prophetic text, in other words. He was writing about this before. He was writing about this transformation underway in the nature of our consciousness and our civilization in a way that most people at the time were not sensitive to yet. But now it's impossible not to be sensitive to it. This viral pandemic and this economic depression are unlike anything to happen before in the history of the capitalist system. I mean, we had, the Spanish flu 100 years ago, and that was catastrophic. But the world is so much further off the industrial capitalist cliff at this point that we have, I think, more severe consequences now for, if we're going to get out of the depression we're in now, we really, in order to do so, need to remake our understanding of the economy. We need something like not only a workers' bill of rights, as FDR suggested, but a Green New Deal, a workers' bill of rights that applies not just to human workers, but to the workers, the co-workers, the other organisms that we share this planet with. And what is impossible for us to ignore today was just beginning to become conscious in the 80s when Thompson was writing this book. So then I'm going to read a bit about what Thompson says about what he calls a Gaia politique towards the end of this text, Pacific Shift. He says, when the adaptive play of a mentality reaches the point of its climactic growth within a cultural ecology, the imagination surrounds the old mentality, rearticulates it in an intense fashion that amounts to a miniaturization, and then moves on into the larger space of the unknown. He says the basic intuition is that a shift from industrial work, abstraction, and materialism to play, sensual consciousness, and an unimaginable culture is that this sort of shift is underway. He says, I think the elimination of evil will require more than a classless, undifferentiated society. Rather, it will require something closer to the Buddha's enlightenment of all sentient beings. So, something I've been feeling recently, and I guess this is really what I'd love to talk about, is I was involved in the Bernie campaign, really going back to 2016, and to have him now drop out and to see the really utter lack of any sort of excitement or enthusiasm around Biden, and his failure to meet the moment with at least a healthcare plan, if not a larger economic plan, to meet the severity of the moment. It's got me so disillusioned with the possibility of transformation happening through the political sphere. I just can't see it happening. If someone like Bernie Sanders can't really get elected, then what hope is there to transform our political system where Congress is literally working for, on behalf of, representing the richest, not even 1%, the richest 1/10 of 1%, while the 99% of us, the 99.9% of us, that make up the rest of the economy, are getting table scraps. So we're in a situation where the political institutions that have been governing our society they're just failing. They're completely failing, and I'm just wondering to what extent we can continue to collectively legitimize them. I'm not saying we shouldn't vote, because so long as there's any any difference between Republicans and Democrats, which, all granted economically they're pretty much identical, it's one corporate duopoly, on some social issues, on some racial issues, on some ecological issues, there are still vast differences between the Democrats and the Republicans, even if the Democratic platform doesn't go nearly far enough to actually deal with the economic and social and ecological crises that we are facing. So, given my my loss of hope, maybe not completely lost yet, but really a drain in my hope that these political institutions and voting and trying to work on campaigns for political candidates, that can actually bring about the change we need, has led me to works like Thompson, who's not dismissing the political, but saying we need a transformation of consciousness and culture, and that we can't expect the political, which lags behind the cultural, to solve the crisis for us. And so what does it mean then to work for transformation in the realm of consciousness and culture? in poetry, rather than working for it in the realm of politics. Well, it's, as Shelley said, that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, meaning poets are shaping the rules by which reality unfolds, through their expressions and their poetic forms. They're shaping reality, but they're unacknowledged because we only acknowledge the politicians and the legislators as the lawmakers who shape reality, who put the structure in place by which um, that all of us have to obey. Poets are actually creating the structure of reality, even if it appears on the surface as though politicians are doing it. The poets are first to break through into the new mentality always, and the politicians are struggling to catch up. So, you know what? I think I better pause here because my battery's about to die. Thompson's way of approaching our moment as per 5, and I'll jump back on a little bit after I've charged up.